The morning sun cast long shadows across Jefferson Elementary as Maria Santos pulled into the parking lot, her beat-up Honda Civic sputtering to a reluctant stop. She glanced at her watch. 7:15 a.m. 15 minutes to prepare for another day of substitute teaching. Another day of trying to wrangle 30 restless third graders who would test every ounce of patience she possessed. Maria had no idea that this ordinary Tuesday would become the day that changed everything, not just for her, but for an entire police department, a community, and ultimately, for anyone who had ever been underestimated because of who they appeared. To be on the surface. At 32, Maria had spent the last 5 years bouncing between classrooms throughout the Denver school district. She wasn't a permanent fixture anywhere, wasn't the teacher whose name appeared on classroom doors or who got invited to faculty meetings. She was the substitute, the temporary solution, the placeholder, the one who showed up when the real teachers couldn't. And she had grown accustomed to the looks she received, the polite but distant smiles from administrators, the barely concealed eye rolls from students who saw her as an easy mark, the way conversations seemed to pause when she entered the teachers' lounge. But what none of them knew, what Maria had never felt the need to advertise, was that before she had dedicated her life to education, before she had chosen the thankless path of molding young minds, she had lived an entirely different existence. Hidden beneath her modest cardigans and sensible flats was a past that would have shocked every person who had ever dismissed her as just the substitute teacher. Maria had served 8 years in the United States Marine Corps, 4 of those as a designated marksman with the 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. She had completed 3 combat deployments, 2 to Afghanistan and 1 to Iraq, where her steady hands and unshakable focus had earned her commendations and the respect of Marines, who had initially questioned whether a woman belonged in their ranks. Her service record included achievements that would have impressed even the most seasoned military personnel: expert marksmanship badges, combat action ribbons, and shooting scores that had become legendary within her unit. The transition from military service to civilian life had been jarring. After years of structure, purpose, and clear objectives, Maria had found herself adrift in a world that seemed to have no place for her particular set of skills. She had tried various job security work, private contracting, even a brief stint as a shooting instructor at a local range. But nothing had filled the void that her military service had left behind. It wasn't until she had volunteered to help with an after-school program for military children that she had discovered her true calling. Working with those kids, seeing their faces light up when they finally grasped a difficult concept, had awakened something in her that she hadn't felt since her days in uniform, the sense that she was making a real difference. So Maria had gone back to school, earning her teaching certification while working part-time jobs to pay the bills. She had envisioned herself with her own classroom, her own students, her own little corner of the world where she could build something lasting. But the reality of public education was harsh. Budget cuts meant fewer full-time positions, and those that were available often went to candidates with more traditional educational backgrounds or political connections. Maria found herself relegated to the substitute pool, a professional purgatory where she was needed but never truly wanted. Irony wasn't lost on her. In the Marines, she had been valued for her precision, her reliability, her ability to perform under pressure. But in the civilian world, those same qualities seemed to count for nothing if you didn't have the right connections or the right pedigree. She had learned to keep her military background to herself. Too many people had preconceived notions about female veterans, and she had grown tired of the surprised looks and awkward questions that inevitably followed any mention of her service. As Maria gathered her materials from the passenger seat lesson plans that she had prepared the night before, a thermos of coffee that would have to last her until lunch, and a small bag of supplies she had purchased with her own money, she reflected on how different her life might have been if she had made different choices. Her former unit commander had recommended her for officer candidate school, and she had been accepted to several prestigious shooting competitions that could have launched a career in professional marksmanship. But she had chosen this path instead, believing that education was where she could make the most meaningful impact. The morning was crisp, with the kind of clarity that made the Rocky Mountains seem close enough to touch. Maria took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders in a gesture that any Marine would have recognized, and walked toward the school entrance. She had no way of knowing that by the end of this day, her carefully compartmentalized life would be turned upside down, that the skills she had worked so hard to leave behind would thrust her into a situation that would test everything she had learned about courage, precision, and the true meaning of service. The school hallways were already buzzing with activity as teachers prepared for the day ahead. Maria checked in with the main office, collected her temporary badge and classroom keys, and made her way to room 127, where she would spend the next 8 hours trying to teach multiplication tables to a group of 8-year-olds who would much rather be outside playing. She had done this hundreds of times before, but today felt different, somehow charged with a potential that she couldn't quite name. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As Maria unlocked the classroom door and stepped inside, she couldn't have imagined that within hours, she would be thrust into a situation that would challenge every assumption about who she was and what she was capable of. The events that would unfold would force her to confront not just external threats, but the internal barriers she had built to protect herself from a world that had never fully appreciated her true worth. The classroom smelled of disinfectant and broken crayons, a scent that had become as familiar to Maria as gun oil and canvas once had been. She surveyed the space-20-8 desks arranged in neat rows, alphabet charts covering the walls, and a whiteboard that still bore traces of yesterday's math lesson. Mrs. Henderson, the regular teacher, had left detailed notes about the day's activities, along with warnings about which students might prove challenging. Tommy sits in the front row because he has trouble focusing, the note read. Sarah is brilliant but gets bored easily. And watch out for Marcus, he's been acting out since his parents' divorce. Maria smiled slightly. After dealing with homesick Marines and stressed-out soldiers, she figured she could handle a classroom full of third graders. The first students began trickling in at 8:30, their backpacks bouncing as they ran to their seats. Maria introduced herself with the same calm confidence she had once used to brief reconnaissance missions. Good morning, everyone. I'm Miss Santos, and I'll be your teacher today. Mrs. Henderson had to take care of something important, but she left me everything we need to have a great day. Tommy raised his hand immediately. Are you going to be mean like the last substitute? I'm going to be fair, Maria replied, recognizing the testing behavior. If you work hard and treat each other with respect, we'll get along just fine. The morning proceeded normally enough. They reviewed multiplication tables, read a story about a brave little mouse, and worked on a science project about the water cycle. Maria moved between the desks with practiced ease, helping struggling students and challenging those who finished early. She had developed a rhythm to substitute teaching. Stay flexible, keep the energy up, and never let them see you sweat. Around 10:30, something changed in the atmosphere outside the classroom. Maria noticed it first as a subtle shift in the background noise of the school. The usual sounds of distant conversations and closing lockers seemed to fade, replaced by something more urgent. Her military training kicked in before her conscious mind could process what was happening. Her posture straightened, her senses sharpened, and she found herself unconsciously scanning the room for potential threats and exit routes. Miss Santos? Sarah's voice cut through her assessment. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, Maria replied automatically, but she moved closer to the door. Through the small window, she could see the hallway was unusually quiet. No students at the water fountain. No teachers stepping out of their classrooms. That was wrong. Jefferson Elementary was never this quiet during school hours. Her phone buzzed with a text message from the main office. Code yellow. All teachers remain in classrooms with doors locked. Do not respond to this message. Maria's blood ran cold. Code yellow meant potential threat on or near campus. She had memorized all the emergency protocols during her first week of substitute teaching, but she had never imagined she would need to use them. Her mind immediately went to the worst-case scenarios she had been trained to handle in the military active shooters, terrorist attacks, hostage situations. But this was an elementary school in suburban Denver, not a combat zone in Afghanistan. "Class," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins, "we're going to play a special quiet game. I need everyone to sit on the floor behind your desks, and we're going to see who can be the quietest mouse in the forest." The students, sensing the change in her tone, complied without question. Maria moved to the door and turned the lock, then pulled down the shade over the window. She had drilled this scenario in her mind countless times, but facing it with 28 young children under her protection made everything feel exponentially more serious. "Miss Santos," whispered Marcus, the boy who supposedly had been acting out. "Are we in trouble?" "No, sweetheart," Maria replied, crouching down to his level. "We're just being extra careful today. You're all safe with me." And in that moment, as she looked into the trusting eyes of her students, Maria felt the familiar weight of responsibility she had carried as a Marine. These children were counting on her to keep them safe, just as her fellow Marines had once counted on her to watch their backs. The stakes felt even higher now. These weren't trained soldiers who had chosen to put themselves in harm's way. These were innocent children who deserved to feel secure in their school. Her phone buzzed again with an update from the principal. "Situation developing. Police on scene. Maintain lockdown procedures." Maria's training told her to gather more intelligence to understand the nature of the threat they were facing. But her primary responsibility was to these children, huddled on the floor and looking to her for guidance. She had to be their rock, their source of calm in what was clearly becoming a crisis situation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Outside, she could hear the distant sound of sirens approaching, multiple vehicles by the sound of it. The professional part of her mind began automatically cataloging the information police response time, number of units, potential tactical positioning. But the teacher in her focused on keeping the children calm and occupied. "Let's play the quiet game a little longer," she whispered. "Can anyone tell me what they learned about the water cycle today?" The sound of footsteps in the hallway made Maria's pulse quicken. Heavy, deliberate steps that didn't belong to school staff or children. She recognized the cadence tactical movement, the kind she had used herself during room-clearing exercises. Law enforcement was inside the building. Through the crack under her door, she could see the shadows of multiple figures moving past. The footsteps were accompanied by the soft rustle of tactical gear and the occasional whispered communication. Maria's mind raced through possibilities. If police were conducting a room-by-room search, that meant the threat was either contained or still active. Somewhere in the building. Her phone vibrated with another message from the principal. "Armed individual barricaded in North Wing. SWAT team on scene. Maintain lockdown until all clear." Maria's stomach clenched. The North Wing was where the main office was located, along with the library and several fourth-grade classrooms. If someone was barricaded there, it meant dozens of students and staff were potentially in immediate danger. Her military instincts screamed at her to move, to help, to do something other than wait passively while others faced the threat. But she had 28 children depending on her to keep them safe. She couldn't abandon her post, no matter how much her training urged her to act. "Miss Santos," Sarah whispered from her spot on the floor. "My mom works in the office. Is she okay?" Maria's heart broke a little. Sarah's mother was probably one of the administrative assistants she had checked in with that morning, a kind woman who had smiled warmly and welcomed her to Jefferson Elementary. "The police are here to make sure everyone stays safe," Maria replied, hoping her voice conveyed more confidence than she felt. The next 30 minutes felt like hours. Maria kept the children engaged with whispered stories and quiet activities, all while monitoring the sounds from the hallway. The tactical team had established a perimeter. She could tell from the positioning of their communications and the way they moved past her door in coordinated intervals. Through the building's intercom system, she heard fragments of police radio chatter. The person they were dealing with was apparently a former employee who had been terminated earlier that year and had returned with grievances against the administration. He was armed and had barricaded himself in the main office area after threatening several staff members. Maria's training automatically kicked in as she processed this information. Former employee meant he knew the building layout, which gave him a tactical advantage. Barricaded position meant he had chosen his ground carefully, probably with good sight lines and limited approach routes. And the fact that he had specifically targeted the administration suggested this was a planned attack, not a spontaneous act of violence. The sound of her classroom door handle being tested made every muscle in Maria's body tense. She had locked it, but someone was now checking to make sure. A soft knock followed, then a whispered, "Police." "Ma'am, are you and your students secure?" Maria approached the door cautiously. "We're secure. 28 students and 1 teacher. All safe. Good. Stay locked down until we give the all clear. We're working to resolve the situation." But as the officer moved away, Maria caught a fragment of radio communication that made her blood run cold. "Subject has superior position and clear sight lines. Unable to establish containment. Requesting sniper support." The pieces clicked together in her mind with military precision. The barricaded individual had positioned himself somewhere with good visibility, probably the second-floor office area that overlooked the main entrance and parking lot. The responding officers couldn't get close enough to neutralize the threat without exposing themselves to gunfire. And if they needed sniper support, it meant they were dealing with someone who knew how to use his weapon effectively. Maria closed her eyes and tried to push down the memories that were surfacing, memories of similar situations she had faced. In Afghanistan, where insurgents had barricaded themselves in buildings and used their elevated positions to pin down coalition forces. She remembered the feeling of helplessness when they had called for sniper support, only to be told that the closest marksman was hours away. "Miss Santos?" Tommy's voice brought her back to the present. "Are we going to be okay?" "Yes," she replied, firmly, and meant it. Whatever was happening in the North Wing, she would make sure these children made it home safely to their families. That was her mission now, and she would not fail. But even as she reassured her students, Maria's mind was working through tactical scenarios. If the situation escalated, if the threat spread beyond the North Wing, she needed to be ready to move. Her classroom had 2 exits, the main door to the hallway and an emergency exit that led directly to the playground. If necessary, she could evacuate her students through the back exit and establish a safe perimeter in the wooded area behind the school. The sound of helicopters overhead told her that this situation was escalating beyond local law enforcement capabilities. News helicopters probably, but possibly tactical support as well. Maria had been in enough high-stakes situations to know that when air support arrived, things were getting serious. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. Seeing news reports about Jefferson Elementary. "Are you okay?" Maria quickly typed back, "Safe, can't talk now." She didn't want to worry her family, but she also couldn't provide details about an ongoing tactical situation. The children were being remarkably brave, she realized. They seemed to understand the gravity of the situation without fully comprehending the danger. Marcus had put his arm around a younger girl who was fighting back tears. Sarah was helping Tommy stay calm by whispering facts about animals. Even in crisis, they were taking care of each other. Maria felt a fierce protectiveness wash over her. These children represented everything good and innocent in the world, and she would use every skill she had learned in 8 years of military service to keep them safe. The radio chatter Maria could hear through the building's intercom system was becoming increasingly frustrated. The SWAT team had been on scene for over an hour, and the situation was not improving. The barricaded individual had positioned himself in the school's administrative offices on the 2nd floor, with clear sight lines to all the main approaches. Worse, he had taken 2 hostages, members of the office staff, who had been unable to evacuate when the lockdown began. "This is command," Maria heard through the static. "What's your assessment on containment?" "Negative on containment," came the response. "Subject has elevated position with 270-degree visibility. Any approach puts officers in exposed kill zone. We need overwatch." Maria's military experience translated the tactical language automatically. Overwatch meant sniper support someone, positioned to provide covering fire or eliminate the threat if necessary. But from the continued radio chatter, it was clear that establishing an effective sniper position was proving problematic. "Rooftop access is compromised," another voice reported. "Subject has direct line of sight to all elevated positions within effective range. Requesting assets from state level." The frustration in the commander's voice was evident even through the crackling radio. "State assets are minimum 2 hours out. We've got hostages in a school full of children. I need options now." Maria found herself automatically analyzing the tactical situation from her position in the locked classroom. Jefferson Elementary was a typical suburban school, built in the 1990s, 2 stories, with the administrative offices positioned on the 2nd floor of the north wing. The building had been designed for openness and natural light, with large windows that normally made the space feel welcoming. But in a tactical situation, those same windows created a nightmare scenario for law enforcement. If the subject had barricaded himself in the principal's office, he would have commanding views of the parking lot, the main entrance, and the courtyard where officers might try to establish positions. The nearest buildings tall enough to provide sniper overwatch were residential homes several blocks away too far for an effective shot. Especially with hostages in the mix, Maria's mind involuntarily drifted to her own experience with similar situations. In Afghanistan, she had been part of a unit that specialized in urban operations, clearing buildings and neutralizing threats in complex environments. Her role as a designated marksman had often put her in positions where she had to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death for her fellow Marines, but this was different. This was a school filled with children, not a combat zone. The rules of engagement were completely different, and the margin for error was 0. "Miss Santos," whispered Sarah, "my tummy hurts." Maria knelt beside the girl, recognizing the physical symptoms of stress and fear. "That's normal, sweetheart. When we're worried, our bodies sometimes react that way. Just breathe slowly with me." As she helped Sarah through a simple breathing exercise, Maria continued monitoring the radio communications. The SWAT team was running out of options. They had tried negotiation, but the subject wasn't responding to attempts at communication. They had considered using tear gas, but the risk to the hostages was too high. And with every passing minute, the psychological pressure on everyone involved was increasing. "Command, this is Tactical 1, came a new voice over the radio. "We've identified a potential approach through the maintenance tunnels, but it's high risk. Subject would have multiple opportunities to engage during approach." "Negative," Command responded immediately. "Too many variables. We need to wait for state assets." But Maria could hear the tension in the commander's voice. 2 hours felt like an eternity when you had hostages and an unstable individual with a weapon. Anything could happen in 2 hours. The subject could panic, could hurt the hostages, could decide to expand his target selection beyond the administrative staff. The sound of children crying in distant classrooms could be heard through the building's ventilation system. Teachers throughout the school were dealing with the same challenge. Maria faced keeping young children calm and secure while a potentially deadly situation unfolded. Just down the hall, Maria's phone buzzed with another update from the principal. Situation ongoing. Parents gathering at community center. Do not attempt to leave building. She could only imagine the scene outside, frantic parents demanding information about their children, media crews arriving to cover the story, and law enforcement trying to maintain a secure perimeter while dealing with an increasingly complex tactical situation. "I want to go home," Tommy whispered from his spot on the floor. "I know, buddy," Maria replied. "The police are working really hard to make sure everyone can go home safely. We just need to be patient a little longer." But even as she spoke the words, Maria was becoming increasingly concerned about the tactical stalemate developing outside her classroom. In her military experience, prolonged standoffs rarely ended well. The longer a situation dragged on, the more likely it was that someone would make a mistake. Either the subject would become more desperate, or the response team would feel pressured to take risks they might normally avoid. She found herself thinking about the 2 hostages in the administrative office. They were probably terrified, unsure if they would see their families again. Maria had been in similar situations herself, pinned down by enemy fire and wondering if the next few minutes would be her last. The helplessness was almost unbearable. The radio crackled again. "Command, we're losing light. Subject has closed blinds on east-facing windows. Visibility is becoming compromised." Maria glanced at the clock on the classroom wall. It was nearly 2 p.m., still several hours before sunset, but the autumn day was already beginning to fade. Reduced visibility would make the tactical situation even more challenging for the SWAT team. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria overheard a frustrated exchange between tactical team members about the impossibility of establishing an effective sniper position. The school's architecture, combined with the residential neighborhood surrounding it, created a perfect storm of tactical challenges. "We need elevation and clear sight lines," one officer was saying. "But every position we've identified puts civilians at risk or gives the subject advance warning." "What about the water tower?" another voice suggested. "Too far. Nearly 800 meters, and there's no way to guarantee wind conditions." Maria's breath caught in her throat. 800 meters. In military terms, that was a challenging but not impossible shot for a skilled marksman. She had made similar shots during her deployments, though never with civilian hostages in the equation. "Plus," the first officer continued, "we'd need someone qualified for that kind of precision work. Our team's sniper is good, but 800 meters with hostages? That's asking for a miracle." Maria closed her eyes and tried to push down the voice in her head that was screaming at her to act. She was a substitute teacher now, not a Marine. Her duty was to these children, not to insert herself into a tactical situation that trained professionals were struggling to resolve. But the radio chatter continued, and it was becoming clear that the SWAT team was running out of options. The subject had stopped responding to negotiation attempts entirely. Reports suggested he was becoming increasingly agitated, and there had been sounds of disturbance from the hostage location that made everyone fear the worst. "Command, this is Tactical 1. We need to make a decision. Subject appears to be escalating. We may need to attempt dynamic entry regardless of risk factors." Maria's military training told her exactly what that meant. Dynamic entry against a barricaded subject with hostages was extraordinarily dangerous. Even with the best tactical team, The chances of civilian casualties were high. And if the entry went wrong, the situation could deteriorate rapidly. Her phone rang softly, a call from her sister. "Maria, I'm watching the news. They're saying it's a hostage situation. Are you okay?" "I'm okay," Maria whispered. "I have to go." "Wait, the news is saying they can't get a clear shot at the guy. Something about the building design." "Maria, you could—" "No," Maria cut her off firmly. "I'm not that person anymore. I'm a teacher." But even as she ended the call, Maria's mind was working through the tactical problem. 800 meters from an elevated position, with clear sight lines to the administrative offices. It was a challenging shot, but not impossible. Not for someone with her training and experience. She thought about the two hostages, probably mothers themselves, with children waiting for them to come home. She thought about the tactical team, trained professionals who were being asked to attempt an operation that would put everyone at risk. And she thought about her students, innocently trusting her to keep them safe in a situation that was spiraling beyond anyone's control. The radio crackled again. "Command, hostage situation is deteriorating. Subject appears to be becoming increasingly agitated. We need to act. Stand by," came the response. "We're still waiting on state assets." Maria looked at her students still huddled on the floor, still trusting her to protect them. They had been incredibly brave, but she could see the strain beginning to show. Some were crying quietly, others staring at the ceiling with the blank expression of children trying to process something beyond their understanding. "Miss Santos?" Marcus whispered. "Are we going to be okay?" "Yes," she replied automatically. But for the first time since the crisis began, she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Maria, this is Captain Johnson from the SWAT team. Got your number from school records. We know about your military background. We need to talk." Maria's heart pounded as she stared at the message. Someone had done their homework, had discovered her service record, and put two and two together. The tactical team was desperate enough to reach out to a civilian to her. She typed back, "I have students to protect. We know, but we also have two hostages who are going to die if we can't find a solution. 800 meters shot from the water tower. We need someone with your qualifications." Maria's hands trembled as she read the message. This was the moment she had been dreading since she left the military, the moment when her two worlds collided, when her past and present could no longer be kept separate. She looked at her students again, these innocent children who had been placed in her care. Then she thought about the hostages, about the tactical team facing an impossible situation, about the families waiting outside for news of their loved ones. "I need someone to take over my classroom," she typed back. "Already arranged. Officer Martinez has children this age. She's outside your door." Maria took a deep breath. She had made her decision. The substitute teacher was about to become something. She had never expected to be again a Marine in action. With lives hanging in the balance. The soft knock on Maria's classroom door came exactly 3 minutes after her text exchange with Captain Johnson. Through the small window, she could see Officer Martinez, a woman about her own age with kind eyes and the confident posture of someone accustomed to dealing with children in crisis situations. "Class," Maria announced quietly, "Officer Martinez is going to stay with you while I help the other officers with something important. I need everyone to listen to her, just like you've been listening to me." Tommy raised his hand. "Are you coming back?" The question hit Maria harder than she expected. "Yes," she said firmly. "I promise I'm coming back." As she opened the door, Officer Martinez stepped inside with a reassuring smile. "Hi, everyone. I'm Officer Martinez, and I have a daughter just about your age. Who can tell me what you've been learning about today?" Maria felt a surge of gratitude for the woman's professional approach. She was treating the children with exactly the right balance of authority and warmth, immediately engaging them in conversation to keep their minds occupied. "They're good kids," Maria whispered to Martinez. "Sarah's mom works in the office. She's worried. Marcus has been helping keep everyone calm." "I've got this," Martinez replied. "Go do what you need to do." Maria stepped into the hallway and was immediately struck by how different the school felt. The normally bright, cheerful corridors were now filled with tactical officers in full gear, their movements precise and purposeful. The transformation was jarring. Her workplace had become a battlefield, and she was about to cross the line from civilian to combatant. Captain Johnson was waiting for her at the end of the hallway. A tall man with graying hair and the bearing of someone who had seen too many difficult situations. "Miss Santos," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for doing this." "Don't thank me yet," Maria replied. "I haven't made this kind of shot in 5 years, and never with civilian hostages." "Your service record says otherwise," Johnson said, walking with her toward the school's main entrance. 3 confirmed kills at distances over 800 meters. Commendations for precision marksmanship under combat conditions. "Your former CO says you were the best natural shooter he ever worked with." Maria was surprised. "You spoke to Colonel Martinez?" 20 minutes ago. He said if anyone could make this shot, it would be you. He also said you'd probably try to talk yourself out of it, because you're too humble for your own good." Despite the gravity of the situation, Maria almost smiled. That sounded exactly like something her former commanding officer would say. Colonel Martinez had been the one who had pushed her to compete in marksmanship competitions, who had recommended her for specialized training, who had tried to convince her to pursue a career in competitive shooting after her military service. As they walked through the school's main entrance, Maria was struck by the scene outside. The parking lot had been transformed into a tactical command center, with armored vehicles positioned strategically around the perimeter and officers in various positions maintaining sight lines on the building. Beyond the immediate tactical zone, she could see the media trucks and worried parents being held back by a secondary perimeter. "Walk me through the tactical situation," Maria said. Her military training automatically taking over, Johnson led her to a tactical command vehicle, where maps and building schematics were spread across a table. "Subject is here," he pointed to the second-floor administrative offices. "Principal's office, specifically. He's got 2 hostages, the secretary and the vice principal, both women, both in their 50s. What do we know about the subject?" David Kellerman, 34, former custodian, was terminated 6 months ago for inappropriate behavior towards staff. No military background, but he's got hunting experience and apparently knows how to use the rifle he brought. Maria studied the building schematic, her mind automatically calculating angles and distances. "Show me the water tower position." Johnson handed her a pair of binoculars and pointed toward a water tower visible in the distance, 795 meters from the tower to the target window. "We've got a team ready to transport you, plus a spotter with tactical communications." Maria raised the binoculars and studied the tower. It was an older municipal structure, probably built in the 1980s, with a maintenance platform that would provide a stable shooting position. The angle looked good, elevated enough to clear the surrounding buildings, with direct line of sight. "To the administrative offices, wind conditions?" she asked. "Variable, 3 to 7 miles per hour from the southwest. Not ideal, but manageable." "Equipment?" "We've got a .308 with a quality scope. Not military grade, but it's what we have available." Maria nodded. The .308 was a solid choice for the distance and conditions. She had trained extensively with similar rifles during her military service, and while it wasn't her preferred weapon system, she was confident in her ability to make the shot. "What's the timeline?" she asked. "We've got maybe 30 minutes before the subject becomes completely unpredictable." He's already fired warning shots, and our negotiator thinks he's building up to something. If we're going to do this, we need to move now." Maria took a deep breath and felt the familiar calm that had always come over her before a difficult shot. It was like slipping into an old, comfortable uniform, the transformation from civilian to warrior, from teacher to Marine. "Let's go." The ride to the water tower took 12 minutes, during which Maria found herself falling back into mental routines she hadn't used in years. She visualized the shot, calculated for wind and distance, and began the process of achieving the mental state she would need for precision marksmanship at this level. "You okay?" asked Sergeant Williams, the spotter who would be working with her. "Getting there," Maria replied. "This is just like riding a bike, except the bike is a precision rifle, and people's lives depend on not falling off." Williams laughed nervously. "My wife's a teacher too. Says you folks are tougher than most soldiers she's met." "Your wife is a smart woman," Maria said, checking her watch. "How long since you've been in a situation like this?" "First time with a civilian making the shot," Williams admitted. "But I've been spotting for tactical teams for 8 years. We'll make a good team." As they approached the water tower, Maria could see the maintenance ladder that would take them to the shooting platform. It was a climb of about 40 feet, manageable but not trivial when carrying precision equipment. "One more thing," Captain Johnson said over the radio. "The subject has been monitoring police frequencies. He knows we're positioning for a long-range shot. He's expecting us." Maria paused at the base of the ladder. "That changes things." "How so?" "It means he's alert and ready. No element of surprise. I'll get one shot, and it has to be perfect." The weight of that statement settled over everyone. In the vehicle, one shot, 2 lives hanging in balance. A school full of children waiting for resolution. A community watching and hoping. Maria began climbing the ladder, feeling the familiar focus that came with accepting absolute responsibility for the outcome of a life-or-death situation. The substitute teacher was gone now, replaced by the Marine, who had never missed when it mattered most. Asterisk. The metal rungs of the water tower ladder were cold against Maria's hands as she climbed, each step taking her further from her civilian identity and deeper into the mindset she had thought she'd left behind forever. Sergeant Williams followed close behind, carrying the spotting scope and additional equipment they would need to establish an effective shooting position. 40 feet had never seemed so high. With each rung, Maria felt the weight of responsibility growing heavier. Below her, she could see the tactical command vehicles, the media trucks, and the small army of first responders who had mobilized to deal with this crisis. All of them were counting on her to make a shot that would end this standoff safely. "How you doing up there?" Williams called from below. "Fine," Maria replied, though her heart was pounding, not from the physical exertion, but from the magnitude of what she was about to attempt. 5 years ago, she had been making shots like this regularly in Afghanistan. But that was a different world with different rules and different consequences for failure. As she reached the maintenance platform, Maria took a moment to survey the tactical situation from her elevated position. The school looked different from up here, smaller, more vulnerable. She could see the administrative offices where the hostages were being held, the windows dark and ominous. Somewhere behind those windows, 2 women were counting on her to save their lives. Williams joined her on the platform and immediately began setting up the spotting scope. "Nice view," he said, trying to inject some levity into the tense situation. "It's about to get a lot more interesting," Maria replied, accepting the rifle case from him. The weapon was a Remington 700 in .308 Winchester, fitted with a high-quality scope and a bipod for stability. Maria had trained extensively with similar rifles during her military service, and she was pleased to find that the weapon felt familiar in her hands. She performed a quick function check, ensuring that the bolt operated smoothly and that the scope was properly zeroed. "Talk to me about the wind," she said, settling into a prone shooting position. Williams consulted his instruments and studied the flags visible around the school. "Currently showing 4 miles per hour from the southwest, but it's been variable. I'm seeing occasional gusts up to 7 miles per hour." Maria nodded, making mental calculations. At 795 meters, even a small variation in wind speed could affect the bullet's trajectory significantly. She would need to time her shot carefully, waiting for a lull in the wind conditions. "Range is 795 meters, Williams confirmed through his spotting scope. "Target window is the large one on the second floor, northwest corner. I can see movement inside, but no clear view of the subject or hostages." "Understood," Maria said, settling the rifle into position and acquiring her sight picture. Through the scope, she could see the school building magnified and crystal clear. The administrative offices were exactly where Captain Johnson had indicated, and she could make out the shadows of movement behind the windows. Her radio crackled with an update from the tactical command. "Sniper team, this is command. Subject has been silent for the past 10 minutes. Negotiator believes he may be preparing to harm the hostages. We need to be ready to take the shot on my command." "Copy that, command," Maria replied. "In position and ready." But even as she spoke the words, Maria felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach. In Afghanistan, her targets had been enemy combatants, people who had chosen to engage in warfare and who posed direct threats to her fellow Marines. This was different. David Kellerman was a civilian, a man who had clearly lost his way but who might still be reached through negotiation. "Second thoughts?" Williams asked quietly. "Always," Maria replied. "But that's what keeps you sharp. The day you stop questioning whether you're doing the right thing is the day you shouldn't be behind a rifle." Through her scope, Maria could see the tactical team positioning around the school building. They had established a perimeter that would allow them to move quickly once the threat was neutralized, but they were maintaining their distance to avoid escalating the situation. "Sniper team, command. We're going to attempt one more round of negotiation. Stand by." Maria watched through her scope as she saw a figure appear at the window, a man in his 30s, holding what appeared to be a hunting rifle. Even at this distance, she could see the agitation in his movements, the way he kept looking around as if expecting an assault from multiple directions. "I have eyes on the subject," she reported. "Adult male, armed with what appears to be a bolt-action rifle. He's positioned at the window, using it as a defensive position." "Can you see the hostages?" Command asked. "Negative. They're deeper in the room, out of my line of sight." "Negotiator is making contact now," Command reported. Through her scope, Maria could see Kellerman lean closer to the window, apparently listening to something being broadcast over a loudspeaker. His body language was tense, aggressive, and she could see him gesturing with his rifle as he responded to whatever the negotiator was saying. "This isn't going well," Williams observed, watching the scene through his spotting scope. Maria had to agree. Even from this distance, she could see that Kellerman was becoming more agitated, not less. His movements were becoming more erratic, and the way he was handling his weapon suggested someone who was running out of patience. "Command, sniper team. Subject appears to be escalating. Recommend we be prepared for immediate action." "Copy that. Stand by for possible engagement order." Maria settled more firmly into her shooting position, her finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. She had done this hundreds of times before, but never with so much at stake. 2 innocent women, a school full of children, and a community watching and waiting for resolution. The wind had calmed to a steady 3 miles per hour breeze. Conditions were as good as they were going to get. The voice of the police negotiator carried across the distance, barely audible even from Maria's elevated position. Through her scope, she could see David Kellerman's agitation increasing with each exchange. His movements were becoming more erratic, and the way he gripped his rifle suggested someone who was rapidly losing control of his emotions. "Sniper team, this is command," came the voice through Maria's earpiece. "Negotiator reports subject is making demands that cannot be met. He wants to speak with specific administrators who terminated his employment, but they're not on site. He's becoming increasingly frustrated." Maria kept her crosshairs centered on Kellerman's position, ready to take the shot if ordered. "Copy that, command. Subject is still using the window as cover. I have a partial target, but shot placement would be challenging with hostages in the room." "Understood. We're going to try to get him to move to a better position. Stand by." Through her scope, Maria watched as Kellerman suddenly moved away from the window, disappearing into the interior of the office. For several tense minutes, there was no movement visible from her position, and no communication from the tactical team on the ground. "What's he doing?" Williams asked, peering through his spotting scope. "Unknown," Maria replied. "But this could be good or very bad. Either he's considering the negotiator's offers, or he's preparing to escalate." The radio crackled again. "All units, command. We're getting reports of disturbance from the hostage location. Sounds of furniture being moved, possibly restraints being applied. This is not a good development." Maria felt her heart rate increase. In her experience, when hostage-takers started restraining their captives, it usually meant they were preparing for a final confrontation. "Command, sniper team. Recommend we prepare for immediate action. Subject may be moving to endgame scenario." "Copy that. All units, prepare for possible dynamic entry." "Sniper team, you are cleared to engage if you have a clear shot and hostages are in immediate danger." The authorization to engage sent a familiar surge of adrenaline through Maria's system. She had been here before, the moment when all the training and preparation came down to a single decision, a single squeeze of the trigger that would determine whether innocent people lived or died. "Wind check," she requested. "Steady at 3 miles per hour. From the southwest," Williams reported. "Range is 795 meters, no change in conditions." Maria made fine adjustments to her scope, compensating for the slight breeze and the distance. At this range, she had to account for bullet drop, wind drift, and the fact that her target might move at the crucial moment. It was a shot that required not just technical skill, but intuition and timing. Kellerman reappeared at the window, and Maria immediately noticed that his demeanor had changed. He was no longer pacing or gesturing wildly. Instead, he appeared calm, focused, and determined, a dangerous combination in someone who had already demonstrated his willingness to use violence. "Subject is back in position," she reported. "Body language suggests he's made a decision about how this ends." "Negotiator is making one final attempt," command reported. "Stand by." Through her scope, Maria could see Kellerman listening to the negotiator's words, but his posture remained unchanged. He had the look of someone who had moved beyond the point where words could reach him. Then everything changed in an instant. Maria saw Kellerman raise his rifle, not toward the window where the tactical team might approach, but toward the interior of the office where the hostages were being held. The intent was clear. He was done negotiating, and he was preparing to harm the people he had taken captive. "Command, sniper team," Maria called urgently. "Subject is targeting the hostages. I need immediate authorization to engage." "Authorized," came the immediate response. "Take the shot." Maria's training took over completely. Years of muscle memory, hundreds of hours of practice, and the absolute certainty that 2 innocent lives depended on her accuracy. She controlled her breathing, settled her sight picture, and began the smooth, steady trigger pull that would send a .308 Winchester bullet across nearly 800 meters of space. The wind was steady. The range was confirmed. The target was clear, but just as Maria was about to fire, Kellerman moved not away from the window, but closer to it. presenting a clearer target while simultaneously exposing himself to return fire from the tactical team below. He's repositioning, Williams observed. Better shot opportunity, but he's also got better firing position on the ground teams. Maria adjusted her aim, tracking Kellerman's movement through her scope. He was moving with purpose now, no longer the erratic behavior of someone in crisis, but the deliberate actions of someone executing a plan. All ground units, take cover. Command ordered. Subject has clear firing position on entry teams. Through her scope, Maria could see Kellerman settling into a shooting position at the window. He was no longer focused on the hostages, he was preparing to engage the tactical team below. The situation had just escalated from a hostage crisis to an active shooter scenario. Subject is preparing to engage ground teams, Maria reported. I have a clear shot, but I need it now. Take it. Command ordered. Maria's finger moved from the trigger guard to the trigger itself. 800 meters. Variable wind. Moving target. 2 hostages somewhere in the room behind her target. A school full of children depending on her to end this threat. She had made difficult shots before, but never with so much at stake. Never with so many innocent lives hanging in the balance. The crosshairs settled on their target. Maria's breathing slowed. Her heart rate steadied. The world narrowed to the precise point where her bullet would need to travel. Time seemed to slow as Maria settled into the final seconds before taking the shot. Through her scope, she could see David Kellerman's finger moving toward the trigger of his own weapon, his rifle now aimed down at the tactical team positioned around the school's entrance. The window of opportunity was closing rapidly. In moments, he would begin firing on the officers below, and the situation would spiral completely out of control. Wind is steady at 3 miles per hour, Williams reported quietly. Range 795 meters. Target is stationary. Maria's breathing slowed to the measured rhythm she had learned in sniper school. Inhale, exhale, natural respiratory pause. In that moment of perfect stillness, when her body was completely motionless and her mind was focused solely on the shot, she began the smooth, steady trigger pull that would send her bullet across the distance. The .308 Winchester round left. The barrel at 2,800 feet per second, beginning its precisely calculated arc through the Colorado air. Maria had compensated for the wind drift, the bullet drop over 795 meters, and the slight downward angle from her elevated position. The mathematics of ballistics, burned into her memory through years of training, had become instinctive. The flight time for the bullet was just over 1 second, an eternity in tactical terms, but a moment that passed in what felt like slow motion. Through her scope, Maria watched Kellerman's position, tracking any movement that might affect the shot's placement. The bullet struck exactly where Maria had aimed center mass, just below the sternum. The impact was immediate and decisive. Kellerman's rifle dropped from his hands as he collapsed backward, away from the window and out of Maria's line of sight. Target down, she reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. I say again, target is down. Confirmed, Williams said, watching through his spotting scope. Clean shot. Subject is neutralized. The radio exploded with activity as the tactical team moved into action. All units move in. Secure the hostages. Medical team, we need you in the administrative offices immediately. Maria kept her rifle trained on the window, watching for any sign of movement that might indicate Kellerman was still a threat. But there was nothing, just the empty window frame and the knowledge that her shot had found its mark. Sniper team, this is command. Outstanding work. We have teams moving to secure the hostages now. Through her scope, Maria could see tactical officers flowing into the school building, their movements coordinated and purposeful. After hours of careful positioning and patient waiting, the crisis was finally reaching its resolution. Hostages are secure, came the report over the radio. Both women are alive and conscious. Medical team is assessing their condition now. Maria felt a wave of relief wash over her. The shot had been successful, but more importantly, the people she had been trying to protect were safe. The two women who had been trapped in that office for hours would be going home to their families tonight. Subject is confirmed deceased. Came another report. Scene is secure. All units, we have successful resolution of the hostage situation. Maria finally allowed herself to relax, lifting her head from the scope and taking a deep breath of the cool afternoon air. The familiar aftermath of a successful mission was setting in, the combination of relief, exhaustion, and the strange emptiness that came after hours of intense focus. "Hell of a shot," William said, shaking his head in amazement. 795 meters. Moving target. Hostages in the room. That's the kind of shooting they make movies about. "It's the kind of shooting I hoped I'd never have to do again," Maria replied, beginning to pack up the rifle. "But I'm glad I was here when it was needed." As they prepared to climb back down the water tower, Maria's radio crackled with a message. "From Captain Johnson. Miss Santos, this is command. We need you back at the school. The children in your classroom are asking for you." Maria smiled for the first time in hours. Her students, the third graders who had been so brave during the lockdown, who had trusted her to keep them safe. They probably had no idea what she had just done, and she hoped they never would need to know. "On my way," she replied. The climb down the water tower felt different from the ascent. Maria was no longer the substitute teacher reluctantly accepting a military role. She was a Marine who had successfully completed her mission and was ready to return to her chosen profession. The two parts of her identity had merged during the crisis, and she realized that she didn't have to choose between them anymore. As they reached the bottom of the tower, Captain Johnson was waiting with a tactical vehicle to transport them back to the school. "The FBI is going to want to debrief you," he said as they climbed into the vehicle. "And the media is going to want to interview you. This is going to be a big story." "I just want to check on my students," Maria replied. "Everything else can wait." "I understand. But I want you to know what you did today saved lives. Not just the hostages, but potentially dozens of people. If Kellerman had started shooting at our officers, this could have turned into a much bigger tragedy." Maria nodded, accepting the praise but not dwelling on it. She had done what needed to be done, using skills she had hoped never to use again. The important thing was that everyone was safe, and that the children in her classroom could go home to their families tonight. As the tactical vehicle pulled into the school parking lot, Maria could see the crowds of parents and media personnel being held back by the police perimeter. Soon, she would have to face questions about what had happened, about how a substitute teacher had ended up making one of the most challenging shots in law enforcement history. But first, she had 28 third graders who needed to see that. Their teacher had kept her promise to come back to them. The scene at Jefferson Elementary was controlled chaos. Parents who had been waiting anxiously for hours were finally being allowed to retrieve their children, while media crews captured every moment of the emotional reunions. Maria watched from the tactical vehicle as families embraced, tears of relief flowing freely after the terror of not knowing if their loved ones were safe. "You ready for this?" Captain Johnson asked as they approached the school entrance. Maria took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." The hallways of Jefferson Elementary felt different, now no longer the sterile corridors of a building under siege, but a school returning to life. Teachers were emerging from classrooms with their students, the sound of children's voices filling the air once again. The lockdown was officially over, but the effects of the day would linger for months to come. Officer Martinez was waiting outside room 127, a smile on her face. "They've been asking for you every 5 minutes," she said. "I think they're more worried about you than they were about the whole situation." Maria felt her heart swell with affection for her students. Even in the midst of a crisis, They had been thinking about her well-being. How did they handle it? Like champions, Martinez replied. Marcus appointed himself the official joke teller. To keep everyone's spirits up, Sarah organized a quiet reading time, and Tommy ... Well, Tommy asked if he could write a letter to the police officers to thank them for keeping everyone safe. As Maria opened the classroom door, she was greeted by 28 faces that lit up with relief and joy. "Miss Santos!" They called out in unison, and suddenly she was surrounded by small arms hugging her legs and waist. "You came back," Tommy exclaimed. "You promised you would come back." "I always keep my promises," Maria replied, kneeling down. "To be at eye level with her students. And I want you all to know how proud I am of how brave you were today. You listened to instructions, you took care of each other, and you showed what it means to be strong when things get scary." Sarah raised her hand. "Miss Santos is my mom, okay?" Maria's throat tightened. Sarah's mother had been one of the hostages, one of the women whose life had hung in the balance during those terrifying hours. "Yes, sweetheart, your mom is fine. She's going to meet you in the office in just a few minutes." As the children shared their experiences from the day, Maria was struck by their resilience. They had been through something that would have challenged many adults, but they were already processing it in the way that children do, with questions, with honesty, and with an acceptance that sometimes scary things happen, but that there are always people working to keep them safe. "Miss Santos," Marcus said quietly, "are you really just a substitute teacher?" The question caught Maria off guard. "What do you mean?" "Officer Martinez said you helped the police with something really important. She said you're a hero." Maria looked around at the faces of her students, these children who had seen her as nothing more than a temporary replacement for their regular teacher. How could she explain that sometimes people are more than they appear to be? That everyone has hidden depths and capabilities that only emerge when they're needed most? "I used to be a soldier," she said simply, "before I became a teacher. Today, I was able to use some of the things I learned as a soldier to help keep everyone safe. But being here with you, being your teacher, that's what makes me happiest." The children absorbed this information with the matter-of-fact acceptance that made them so wonderful to work with. To them, it made perfect sense that their substitute teacher might also be a hero. Adults were full of surprises, and this was just one more example. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Principal Morrison entered, followed by a woman Maria recognized as Sarah's mother. The reunion between mother and daughter was emotional, with tears of relief and joy flowing freely. "Miss Santos," Principal Morrison said, "I wanted to personally thank you for what you did today. The police have briefed me on your actions, and I want you to know that you'll always have a home here at Jefferson Elementary." "Thank you," Maria replied, "but I was just doing what needed to be done." "That's exactly what makes you the kind of person we want teaching our children," Morrison said. "You'll be hearing from the district office soon. There's going to be a full-time position opening up in the spring, and if you're interested, I'd like to recommend you for it." Maria felt tears prick her eyes. After years of being passed over, of being seen as just a temporary solution, she was finally being offered the thing she had wanted most, a chance to be a real teacher, with her own classroom and her own students. "I'd like that very much," she said as the afternoon wore on. Parents arrived to collect their children, each reunion a small miracle of relief and gratitude. The children hugged Maria goodbye, promising to never forget their brave substitute teacher who had kept them safe during the scariest day of their young lives. When the last student had been reunited with their family, Maria found herself alone in the empty classroom. The events of the day felt surreal. Had she really climbed a water tower and made an 800-meter shot just hours ago? Had she really saved 2 lives and ended a crisis that could have claimed many more? Her phone buzzed. With a text from her sister, "Saw the news." "Are you okay?" Maria typed back. I'm okay. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." As she gathered her things and prepared to leave Jefferson Elementary, Maria reflected on the unexpected turns her life had taken. She had come to work that morning as a substitute teacher, someone who was tolerated but not valued, accepted but not appreciated. She was leaving as a hero, but more importantly, as someone who had finally found her place in the world. The substitute teacher and the Marine were no longer separate parts of her identity. They were complementary aspects of who she was, each making the other stronger and more complete. By the time Maria walked out of Jefferson Elementary that evening, the story was already spreading across social media and news networks. "Substitute teacher turned hero," read one headline. "Former Marine saves hostages with 800-meter shot," proclaimed another. The narrative was irresistible to media outlets. A humble substitute teacher who revealed herself to be an elite marksman when her community needed her most. Maria's phone had been buzzing continuously with calls from reporters, but she had ignored them all. She wasn't ready to talk about what had happened, wasn't prepared for the attention that was about to descend upon her quiet life. All she wanted was to go home, process the events of the day, and try to return to some semblance of normalcy. But normalcy was no longer an option. As she pulled into her apartment complex, Maria was shocked to find news vans already waiting in the parking lot. Reporters with cameras and microphones approached her car before she could even turn off the engine. "Miss Santos, can you tell us about the shot you made today? How did it feel to save those hostages? Did you ever imagine your military training would be needed in a school setting?" Maria kept her head down and walked quickly toward her apartment building, declining to comment. She had dealt with media attention during her military service, but this felt different, more invasive, more personal. These reporters weren't interested in her as a soldier following orders. They wanted to know about her as a person, as a teacher, as someone who had lived two seemingly incompatible lives. Her sister Carmen was waiting inside her apartment, having used the spare key Maria had given her years ago. "I saw the news," Carmen said, wrapping her in a fierce hug. "I can't believe you did that. I mean, I can believe it because I know what you're capable of. But, Maria, you saved people's lives today. I did what anyone with my training would have done," Maria replied, sinking onto her couch with exhaustion. "No," Carmen said firmly. "Anyone with your training wouldn't have been in a position to help. They wouldn't have been there, caring about those children, willing to put themselves at risk for strangers. That wasn't just the Marine in you, that was the teacher too." Over the next few hours, Maria watched in amazement as the story continued to grow. Local news stations were running extended segments about the crisis at Jefferson Elementary. National networks were picking up the story. Social media was flooded with posts praising her actions and calling her a hero. But what touched her most were the posts from parents of her students. Tommy's mother had written on Facebook, "Miss Santos kept our children safe today. But more than that, she showed them what courage looks like. My son came home talking about how his substitute teacher is the bravest person he's ever met." Sarah's father had posted a photo of his daughter with a handmade card that read, "Thank you, Miss Santos, for saving my mommy." The simple message, written in a child's careful handwriting, meant more to Maria than all the news coverage combined. Her phone rang, and this time she recognized the number. Colonel Martinez, her former commanding officer. "Santos," his familiar voice said when she answered. "I heard what you did today. I'm proud of you, Marine." "Thank you, sir. I just did what needed to be done." "That's exactly what I told the reporters who called me for a quote," Martinez said. "You know, they're calling it one of the most remarkable shots in law enforcement history. 795 meters, civilian hostages, high-stress situation. Hell, half my snipers couldn't have made that shot under those conditions." "I had good training, sir." "You had good instincts and better character," Martinez corrected. "That's why I recommended you for officer candidate school." That's why I tried to convince you to stay in the Corps. You have a gift, Santos, and today you used it to save lives." The conversation with her former CO helped Maria process what had happened. She had spent years trying to distance herself from her military identity, believing that it had no place in her civilian life. But today had shown her that she didn't have to choose between being a warrior and being a teacher. She could be both. The next morning brought a new wave of media attention. Maria's apartment complex was surrounded by news trucks, and reporters were interviewing her neighbors about what kind of person she was. The story had taken on a life of its own, becoming a symbol of hidden heroism and the idea that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when circumstances demanded it. Captain Johnson called with an update on the investigation. "The FBI wants to interview you as part of their standard protocol," he said. "But I want you to know that your actions today are being reviewed at the highest levels. The Department of Justice is considering you for a civilian commendation for heroism." "I appreciate that," Maria said, "but I just want to get back to my students." "About that," Johnson continued, "the school district called. They're offering you a permanent position, not just any position, but a choice of assignments. They want to make sure they don't lose you to another district." The irony wasn't lost on Maria. For years, she had been overlooked for permanent positions, treated as a temporary solution to staffing problems. Now suddenly, everyone wanted to claim her as their own, but the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The Jefferson Elementary PTA had organized a spontaneous gathering that evening, not a formal ceremony, just an opportunity for the school community to come together and process what had happened. Maria arrived to find the school gymnasium filled with families, teachers, and community members. When she walked in, the entire room erupted in applause. Children ran to hug her legs, parents shook her hand with tears in their eyes, and fellow teachers who had barely acknowledged her existence before now looked at her with respect and admiration. Principal Morrison took the microphone. "Today, our school experienced something no one ever wants to go through. But we also discovered that we have angels among us, people who are willing to risk everything to keep others safe. Miss Santos, you didn't just save 2 lives today. You showed our children what it means to be brave, what it means to serve others, and what it means to rise to the occasion when duty calls." As Maria looked out at the faces in the gymnasium, her students, their families, her colleagues, she realized that she had finally found her place in the world. She was no longer just a substitute teacher or just a former Marine. She was both. And that combination made her uniquely qualified to serve her community in ways she had never imagined possible. The week following the Jefferson Elementary crisis was unlike anything Maria had ever experienced. The story had captured national attention, with major news networks featuring segments about the substitute teacher sniper who had saved the day. But beyond the media frenzy, something more meaningful was happening. Maria was discovering what it felt like to be truly valued for who she was, all of who she was. The first major recognition came from the Denver Police Department. Chief Patricia Williams presented Maria with the department's highest civilian honor during a ceremony attended by hundreds of law enforcement officers, city officials, and members of the community. "Miss Santos exemplifies the best of what it means to serve others," Chief Williams said as she pinned the medal on Maria's chest. "Her actions demonstrate that heroism isn't about titles or uniforms, it's about character, skill, and the willingness to act when others are in danger." The ceremony was emotional, but what moved Maria most was seeing her students in the audience. The school district had arranged for her 3rd grade class to attend, and their faces beamed with pride as they watched their teacher receive recognition for her courage. After the ceremony, Tommy approached her with a carefully prepared question. "Miss Santos, will you still be our teacher even though you're famous now?" "Fame doesn't change who I am," Maria replied, kneeling to his level. I'm still the same person who wants to help you learn multiplication tables and discover how amazing the world is. But the question highlighted something Maria had been grappling with since the crisis. The media attention had transformed her from an unknown substitute teacher into a public figure. Job offers were pouring in from around the country, not just teaching positions, but opportunities in law enforcement, military contracting, and media consulting. A major television network wanted her to host a show about everyday heroes. The FBI had inquired about her interest in joining their training academy as an instructor. 3 different school districts had offered her administrative positions with significant salary increases. You could write your own ticket now, Carmen told her over dinner one evening. After what you did, doors are going to open that you never imagined possible. But do I want to walk through those doors? Maria asked. I became a teacher because I wanted to make a difference in children's lives. All of these other opportunities, they're not who I am. Maybe they're who you could become, Carmen suggested. You've proven that you don't have to choose between being a warrior and being a teacher. Maybe there are other ways to combine those skills. That conversation led Maria to start thinking seriously about her future. She had spent so long compartmentalizing her identity, keeping her military experience separate from her civilian career. But the crisis at Jefferson Elementary had shown her that her diverse background was actually her greatest strength. The FBI offer was particularly intriguing. Agent Rebecca Foster had visited Maria personally to discuss the possibility of joining the Bureau's training division. We need instructors who understand real-world applications, Foster explained. Your combination of combat experience and educational background is exactly what we're looking for. What would that involve? Maria asked. You'd help train new agents in marksmanship and tactical decision-making. But more importantly, you'd help them understand the psychological aspects of high-stress situations, how to stay calm when lives are on the line, how to make split-second decisions under pressure. The position would involve travel to the FBI Academy in Quantico, working with law enforcement agencies across the country, and developing training programs that could save lives. It was an opportunity to impact public safety on a national level while still using her teaching skills. But even as she considered these new possibilities, Maria's heart kept pulling her back to Jefferson Elementary. The permanent teaching position the district had offered her came with the freedom to develop innovative curriculum, the resources to create programs that served military families, and the opportunity to mentor other teachers who might have unconventional backgrounds. Principal Morrison had been remarkably supportive during the transition. Whatever you decide, she told Maria, you'll always have a home here. But I hope you'll consider what you could accomplish with your own classroom, your own students, and the platform you now have to inspire other educators. The decision crystallized during a visit to the water tower where she had made the shot that changed everything. Maria climbed the ladder again, this time alone, and stood on the platform looking out over the community she had helped protect. From this vantage point, she could see Jefferson Elementary, the tactical command center that had been dismantled, and the neighborhoods where her students lived with their families. It was a reminder that heroism wasn't just about the dramatic moments that made headlines. It was about the daily commitment to serve others, to make their lives better in whatever way possible. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Miss Santos, I wrote a story about my hero for homework. It's about you. The message was accompanied by a photo of a hand-illustrated story titled, My Teacher Who Saved My Mom. The simple drawing showed Maria with a cape, standing in front of a school with children holding hands behind her. In that moment, Maria knew what her answer would be to all the job offers and opportunities. She would stay at Jefferson Elementary, not because she lacked ambition or courage to try something new, but because she had finally found the place where all aspects of her identity could work together to serve a purpose larger than herself. She would be the teacher who could show students that everyone has hidden depths and capabilities. She would be the educator who could help children from military families understand that service comes in many forms. She would be the role model who demonstrated that strength and compassion were not opposing forces, but complementary virtues that made each other more powerful. The substitute teacher was gone forever, replaced by someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was meant to do. 6 months after the crisis at Jefferson Elementary, Maria Santos walked into her own classroom for the first time. Room 127 was no longer a temporary assignment. It was her domain, her sanctuary, her mission field. The district had honored their promise of a permanent position, and Maria had transformed the space into something that reflected both sides of her identity. The walls displayed traditional educational posters alongside photographs from her military service. A map of the world showed locations where she had been deployed, connected by string to thank you letters from children in those regions. The reading corner featured books about courage, service, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The most meaningful addition was a small display case near her desk, containing the medals and commendations she had earned during her military service alongside the civilian honors she had received after the shooting. A small placard read, "Different chapters, same story," dedicated to serving others. Maria's reputation had preceded her, and the new school year had brought an interesting mix of students. Some were children from military families who had specifically requested placement in her classroom. Others were students who had heard the story and wanted to learn from the hero teacher. But most were simply 8-year-olds who needed someone to help them navigate the challenges of 3rd grade. "Good morning, class," Maria said as her students settled into their seats. "Before we start today's lesson, I want each of you to share one thing that makes you special, something that other people might not know about you just by looking." Hands shot up around the room. Tommy, now in 4th grade but visiting from next door, had been invited to help with the first day introductions. "I know Miss Santos' special thing," he announced proudly. "She's brave like a superhero, but she's also nice like a regular teacher." Maria smiled. "That's very sweet, Tommy. But actually, my special thing is that I love learning new things just as much as you do. Every day in this classroom, you teach me something I didn't know before." The exercise continued around the room. Marcus revealed that he spoke 3 languages at home. Sarah shared that she had memorized all the constellations in the night sky. A new student named David quietly mentioned that his dad was deployed overseas and that he wrote him letters every day. "Thank you for sharing," Maria said after everyone had spoken. "This year, we're going to discover that everyone in this room has hidden talents and capabilities. Some of you might be natural leaders. Others might be peacemakers. Some might be problem solvers or artists or scientists. My job is to help you figure out what you're good at and give you opportunities to use those gifts." The philosophy that guided Maria's teaching had evolved significantly since the crisis. She no longer saw education as simply transmitting knowledge from teacher to student. Instead, she viewed her role as helping children discover their own potential, their own capacity for courage and compassion and excellence. Her classroom had become a laboratory for this approach. Maria incorporated lessons about conflict resolution, drawing on her military experience with peacekeeping operations. She taught problem-solving skills using scenarios that required both analytical thinking and emotional intelligence. She invited guest speakers from various professions: law enforcement officers, doctors, social workers, artists, show students the many ways people could serve their communities. The impact was evident not just in test scores, which had improved dramatically, but in the way her students carried themselves. They displayed confidence tempered with humility, curiosity balanced with respect for others. They understood that strength came in many forms and that everyone had something valuable to contribute. Maria's influence extended beyond her own classroom. The school district had asked her to mentor other teachers, particularly those who might have unconventional backgrounds or non-traditional paths to education. She worked with a former police officer who was transitioning to teaching, a retired nurse who wanted to work with elementary students, and a young veteran who was struggling to find his place in civilian education. The key, Maria told them during one of their monthly meetings, is not to hide who you were before you became a teacher. Your previous experiences are assets, not liabilities. They give you perspectives and skills that traditional educators might not have. The mentoring program had become so successful that other districts were sending representatives to observe and learn from Jefferson Elementary's approach. Maria found herself presenting at education conferences, sharing her story not just as inspiration, but as a practical example of how schools could better utilize the diverse talents of their staff. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The Department of Veterans Affairs contacted Maria about participating in a new program designed to help military veterans transition into civilian careers. They wanted her to serve as a spokesperson and advocate for veterans entering the education field. Your story resonates with so many people who are struggling to find their place after military service, explained Dr. Jennifer Hayes from the VA. You've shown that military skills and civilian careers aren't incompatible. They can actually strengthen each other. The program would involve speaking at veteran transition workshops, consulting on curriculum development for career counseling, and serving as a mentor for veterans considering education careers. It was an opportunity to impact lives on a scale far beyond her individual classroom. Maria accepted the role enthusiastically, seeing it as another way to serve, this time by helping fellow veterans discover that their military experience could be an asset in civilian professions, not something to overcome or hide. The morning routine in room 127 had become a reflection of Maria's integrated approach to teaching and living. Each day began with students sharing something they had learned, someone they had helped, or something they were curious about. It was a simple practice, but it reinforced the values that had guided Maria through her own transformation: continuous learning, service to others, and the courage to ask questions. As she watched her students engage in lively discussions about everything from science experiments to current events, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The substitute teacher who had once felt invisible and undervalued had become someone who was making a real difference in the world. 1 year after the crisis that changed everything, Jefferson Elementary held a special assembly to commemorate the anniversary. The event wasn't designed to relive the trauma of that day, but rather to celebrate the resilience of the school community and the bonds that had been strengthened through adversity. Maria stood at the back of the gymnasium, watching as current and former students, parents, teachers, and community members filled the space. The atmosphere was markedly different from the emergency gathering that had taken place in this same room 12 months ago. Where there had once been fear and uncertainty, there was now a sense of pride and accomplishment. Principal Morrison took the microphone to address the crowd. "Today marks 1 year since our school faced its greatest challenge," she began. "But it also marks the beginning of the most remarkable transformation I've witnessed in 30 years of education." The statistics she shared were impressive. Test scores had improved across all grade levels. Teacher retention was at an all-time high. The school had received a state recognition award for innovative programming. But more importantly, the culture of Jefferson Elementary had evolved into something special, a place where every individual's unique gifts were valued and developed. None of this would have been possible without the courage and dedication of someone who was just supposed to be a substitute teacher for the day, Morrison continued, gesturing toward Maria. "Miss Santos taught us that heroism isn't about seeking recognition. It's about being prepared to serve when service is needed most." The applause was thunderous, but Maria felt a familiar discomfort with being singled out. She had never wanted to be the center of attention. She had simply wanted to do her job well and make a positive difference in children's lives. Tommy, now a confident 5th grader, approached the microphone with a prepared speech. "Miss Santos taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," he said, his voice clear and strong. "It means you do the right thing even when you are scared." She showed us that everyone has special powers, but you only find out what they are when someone needs your help. Sarah followed with her own tribute. "My mom says that Miss Santos saved her life that day, but Miss Santos saved all of us in a different way. She showed us that teachers can be heroes, and heroes can be teachers, and that we can all be both." The children's words meant more to Maria than all the official recognition she had received. These young people understood something that many adults struggled with, that heroism was not about extraordinary abilities, but about ordinary people choosing to act with courage and compassion when the moment demanded it. After the assembly, Maria found herself surrounded by visitors who had come from other school districts to learn about Jefferson Elementary's transformation. Educators, administrators, and policymakers wanted to understand how a single dramatic event had catalyzed such positive change throughout the entire school system. "The secret," Maria explained to a group of principals from neighboring districts, "isn't what happened that day. It's what we chose to do with the experience afterward. We could have focused on the trauma, the fear, the things that went wrong. Instead, we decided to focus on the strength we discovered in ourselves and each other." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a familiar face, Sergeant Williams, the spotter who had worked with Maria during the crisis. He was accompanied by a young woman in her early 20s. "Miss Santos," Williams said, "I'd like you to meet my daughter Ashley. She's starting her student teaching next semester, and she wanted to thank you for inspiring her to pursue education." Ashley stepped forward with a shy smile. "My dad told me about working with you that day. He said you were the most professional person he'd ever worked with under pressure. But what really impressed me was that you went right back to teaching afterward. You chose the classroom over all the other opportunities that came your way." The encounter reminded Maria of something she had come to understand over the past year. Her story had taken on a life of its own, inspiring people in ways she had never intended. Veterans were choosing education careers because they had seen her example. Teachers were staying in the profession because they felt renewed purpose. Students were approaching challenges with greater confidence because they had learned that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. But perhaps the most significant change was in Maria herself. She had finally learned to see her life as a coherent whole rather than a series of disconnected chapters. Her military service hadn't ended when she left the Marines. It had evolved into a different form of service that was equally important and meaningful. The evening concluded with a private dinner for the Jefferson Elementary staff. As Maria looked around the table at her colleagues, people who had once seen her as a temporary outsider, but now treated her as family, she reflected on the unpredictable paths that life could take. "You know what I've learned this year?" she said during the informal toast that Principal Morrison had requested. "I spent so long trying to figure out who I was supposed to be that I forgot to appreciate who I already was. We all have multiple identities, multiple roles we play. The challenge isn't choosing between them, it's learning how to integrate them into something authentic and purposeful." The response from her colleagues was warm and appreciative, but Maria could see in their faces that they understood she was talking about more than just her own journey. Every person in that room had their own story of transformation, their own process of discovering how their various experiences and identities could work together to serve something larger than themselves. As the evening wound down and Maria prepared to leave for home, she took one last look around Jefferson Elementary. The hallways that had once felt foreign and unwelcoming now felt like home. The classroom that bore her name was no longer just a temporary assignment, but a permanent mission field, where she could continue serving others in the way that felt most authentic to who she was. 5 years have passed since the day that transformed a substitute teacher into a national symbol. of everyday heroism. Maria Santos, now 37, stands in her classroom at Jefferson Elementary, preparing for another school year with the confidence of someone who has found their true calling. The walls of room 127 tell the story of her journey. Military commendations, displayed alongside student artwork, thank you letters from former students now in high school, and photographs documenting the remarkable transformation of both the school and its most famous teacher. The impact of Maria's story has rippled far beyond the walls of Jefferson Elementary. The documentary, More Than a Substitute, has been viewed by millions and is now used in teacher training programs across the country. Her book, Precision and Compassion: Lessons from the Classroom and the Battlefield, has become required reading in several education graduate programs. But perhaps most importantly, the Maria Santos Foundation for Veteran Educators has helped more than 200 military veterans transition into teaching careers. The foundation exists because Maria proved that military experience isn't something veterans need to overcome when they enter civilian careers, explains Dr. Jennifer Hayes, now the foundation's executive director. It's something they can leverage to become even more effective in their chosen professions. The statistics support this conclusion. Teachers with military backgrounds who have gone through the Foundation's mentorship program show higher retention rates, greater job satisfaction, and more innovative approaches to classroom management and student engagement. School districts across the country now actively recruit veteran teachers, recognizing the unique value they bring to education. Maria's current students have no memory of the crisis that made their teacher famous. To them, she's simply Miss Santos, the teacher who makes learning exciting, who treats each student as an individual with unique potential, and who somehow manages to be both demanding and nurturing at the same time. She expects a lot from us, says current student Emma Rodriguez, but she also helps us figure out what we're really good at. I never knew I was good at solving problems until Miss Santos started giving us these really hard puzzles to work on. The pedagogical approach that Maria has developed over the past 5 years has attracted attention from education researchers. Her integration of military-style teamwork exercises with traditional academic curriculum has produced remarkable results. Students learn to support each other, to persist through challenges, and to understand that individual success is less important than collective achievement. What Maria has created is a classroom culture that mirrors the best aspects of military units, observes Dr. Patricia Chun, an education researcher from the University of Colorado who has studied Maria's methods. Students learn to rely on each other, to cover each other's weaknesses, and to celebrate each other's strengths. It's producing young people who are not just academically prepared, but emotionally and socially mature. The approach has been so successful that Jefferson Elementary has become a model school, hosting visitors from around the world who want to learn about trauma-informed education, veteran integration in civilian professions, and innovative teaching methodologies. Maria often jokes that she never expected to become an international education consultant, but she takes the responsibility seriously. Every time someone visits our school, it's an opportunity to plant seeds that might help children somewhere else, she explains. If our story can inspire even one teacher to see their students differently, or help one veteran realize they have something valuable to offer in education, then all the attention has been worth it. The personal transformation has been just as significant as the professional recognition. Maria married fellow educator David Kim 2 years ago, a former Army medic who had attended one of her veteran transition workshops. Their wedding was held in the Jefferson Elementary gymnasium, with her former students serving as honorary attendants. David understands both sides of who I am, Maria says. He doesn't see any contradiction between the Marine who made that shot and the teacher who spends her evenings grading spelling tests. He sees them as different expressions of the same commitment to serving others. The couple is expecting their first child, a daughter they plan to name Grace, a name chosen to honor the grace they feel at having found each other and the grace they hope to extend to others throughout their lives. As Maria prepares for motherhood, she's also preparing for a new challenge. The Department of Education has asked her to serve on a national commission examining how schools can better serve military families and integrate veteran educators. It's a role that will require travel and time away from her classroom, but one that could impact education policy at the highest levels. "I'm nervous about leaving my students, even temporarily," Maria admits. "But I've learned that sometimes you have to step outside your comfort zone to serve a larger purpose. If this commission can help create better opportunities for military families and veteran educators, then it's worth the sacrifice." The announcement of Maria's appointment to the commission has generated renewed media interest in her story. But now, 5 years later, the focus has shifted from the dramatic events of that February day to the sustained impact of her work in education and veteran advocacy. Recent interviews reveal a woman who has found peace with her complex identity and clarity about her mission. "I'm not the substitute teacher anymore," she says with a smile. "But I'm not just the Marine who made an impossible shot either. I'm someone who has learned that all of our experiences, military service, teaching, parenting, community involvement, they all work together to make us who we're meant to be." Looking toward the future, Maria sees endless possibilities for expanding the impact of her work. The foundation is developing partnerships with major universities to create fast-track teaching programs for veterans. A pilot program is being launched to place veteran educators in schools serving military families. Plans are underway for a national conference on trauma-informed education and resilience building. The crisis at Jefferson Elementary was just the beginning, Maria reflects. It opened doors I never knew existed and showed me capabilities I never knew I had. But more importantly, it taught me that heroism isn't about one dramatic moment. It's about the choice to keep serving, keep growing, and keep looking for ways to make a positive difference in the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.